The Wyoming wind carried secrets across the Crossroads Ranch that autumn evening, but none more devastating than the letter clutched in Rebecca Hart's trembling hands. 6 weeks pregnant, the doctor's confirmation read, and every person in Carbon County knew her fiancé had been 3 states away for the past 90 days. The envelope slipped from her fingers as footsteps approached behind her, and she realized her carefully constructed future was about to shatter like glass against stone. What happened next would determine not just her fate, but the destiny of the innocent life growing inside her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Hart had always believed that truth was a virtue, something to be honored and upheld regardless of consequence. Standing on the wraparound porch of the Crossroads Ranch main house, watching that letter tumble across weathered planks, she discovered how quickly virtue crumbled when survival hung in the balance. The September sun was setting behind the Medicine Bow Mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold that would have been beautiful if Rebecca's world wasn't simultaneously collapsing. She'd arrived at the ranch that morning, expecting a joyful reunion with Vincent Dalton after his 3-month cattle drive to Montana. Instead, she'd found a hand-delivered letter from Dr. Edmund Chen in Cheyenne waiting in the pile of ranch correspondence. Mistakenly sorted with the Dalton family mail, Margaret Dalton, Vincent's mother, had opened it first. That detail would haunt Rebecca for years to come, the way fate had arranged for her secret to be discovered, not by her fiancé, but by the one woman who had never truly wanted her in the family, Rebecca. Margaret's voice sliced through the evening air like a blade through butter. Inside, now. The parlor of the main house was exactly what one would expect from 40 years of cattle wealth. Heavy furniture imported from Chicago, wallpaper that cost more per roll than most families earned in a month, and a crystal chandelier that caught the last rays of sunlight and scattered them across the Persian rug like scattered diamonds. Rebecca had admired this room once, imagining herself as its future mistress. Now it felt like a courthouse where her sentence was about to be pronounced. Vincent sat in his deceased father's leather chair, and Rebecca's heart clenched at the sight of him. 3 months apart hadn't diminished his striking appearance. Dark hair, strong jaw, the kind of confident bearing that came from never having been told no in his entire 32 years. But his eyes, usually warm when they fell on her, now held the temperature of a January blizzard. The letter sat on the mahogany side table between them. Rebecca could see her name on the envelope, and could imagine the clinical language inside that reduced the most terrifying moment of her life to medical terminology and estimated dates. Sit down. Vincent didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Power spoke in whispers when you controlled half a county. Rebecca remained standing. Some instinct told her that sitting would be submission, would be accepting whatever judgment they'd already decided upon. I can explain. Can you? Margaret settled onto the settee with the careful grace of a woman who'd spent decades perfecting every gesture. Can you explain how you came to be carrying another man's child while engaged to my son? This should be fascinating. The contempt in those words landed like physical blows. Rebecca had known Margaret Dalton for nearly a year, had endured countless dinners where the older woman subtly criticized everything from Rebecca's table manners to her choice of dress fabrics. But she'd never heard such naked hatred before. Vincent was gone. Rebecca's voice emerged steadier than she felt. For 3 months, no letters, no word except what came through ranch business correspondence, and that justifies adultery. Margaret's eyebrows arched. My late husband was often away for months at a time. I never sought comfort in another man's bed. Perhaps you should have. The words escaped before Rebecca could stop them, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. Vincent stood abruptly, the leather chair creaking. You will not speak to my mother that way. Why not? She's speaking to me as though I'm something she scraped off her boot. Rebecca felt a strange liberation in her anger. She'd spent months moderating her words, softening her opinions, making herself smaller to fit into the Dalton family mold. That was over now. You want the truth? Fine, I was lonely. I was scared. I was questioning whether I'd made a terrible mistake accepting your proposal. Clearly you did, Vincent said coldly. Make the mistake, I mean. Did I? Rebecca challenged. Or did you? You proposed to a schoolteacher, Vincent. A woman with her own mind, her own career. Then you spent 6 months trying to turn me into your mother, hosting parties I didn't care about, discussing politics I wasn't allowed to have opinions on, decorating a house I had no say in designing. Margaret rose from the settee. You ungrateful little... Don't! Vincent's hand stopped his mother mid-sentence. His attention remained fixed on Rebecca. Who is he? Rebecca's brief surge of courage faltered. This was the question she'd been dreading, the one that would make everything exponentially worse. It doesn't matter. She tried. It matters to me. Vincent's voice dropped to that dangerous quietness again. I deserve to know which man I employed, trusted, and paid cuckolded me under my own roof. The phrase under my own roof was interesting. Rebecca thought distantly, given that she'd never actually lived in the main house. She'd been staying in the foreman's cottage, alone, while the main house was prepared for their post-wedding occupancy. But Vincent considered everything on Crossroads Ranch to be his roof, his domain, his possession. Michael Brennan. She forced the name out. Vincent's face went absolutely blank. Then red, then white. The progression was almost fascinating if it wasn't terrifying. Michael. He repeated the name as if tasting poison. My foreman. The man I promoted last year. The man I trusted to run this entire operation while I was gone. He didn't pursue me, Rebecca said quickly. It wasn't like that. I was the one who... Spare me the details. Vincent turned away, his shoulders rigid. I don't want to picture it. But Rebecca needed him to understand, needed him to know it hadn't been a calculated seduction or a long-term affair. It was one night. I was crying on the cottage porch because I'd received a letter from the school board in Rawlins. They wanted me to return, said they'd made a mistake accepting my resignation. For the first time since accepting your proposal, I wondered if I'd chosen wrong. Michael was riding past, saw I was upset, stopped to check on me. How considerate of him. Margaret's sarcasm could have etched glass. Rebecca ignored her. We talked for hours. About things I'd never discussed with you, Vincent. About books and ideas and what we wanted from life beyond money and status. About fears and doubts and dreams. He didn't try anything. He listened. Really listened. And then? Vincent demanded. And then I kissed him. Rebecca lifted her chin. I initiated it. I invited him inside. I made the choice. The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Rebecca waited for Vincent's explosion, for his rage. But instead he just looked at her with something worse than anger, disappointment mixed with contempt. Did you love him? He asked finally. The question surprised her. I barely knew him. Then why? How could she explain the complexity of that night to a man who'd never questioned his place in the world? How could she make him understand the suffocating pressure of becoming a Dalton? Of feeling her identity being slowly erased and replaced with a carefully curated version that would reflect well on the family name. Because he made me feel like myself again, Rebecca said quietly. Like Rebecca Hart, the schoolteacher who read philosophy and argued politics. Not Rebecca Dalton-to-be, who needed to smile appropriately and speak only when spoken to. Vincent's jaw worked. I never asked you to stop being yourself. You didn't have to ask. Your mother made it clear what was expected. Rebecca glanced at Margaret, who had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Every dinner, every social occasion, every conversation was a test. I was failing. I wasn't refined enough, wasn't polished enough, wasn't Dalton enough. So you threw away our future over hurt feelings. Vincent shook his head. Over my mother's high standards? I threw it away because I was already losing myself, and we weren't even married yet. Rebecca felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. What would I have been in 5 years, 10? A hollow version of myself, playing a role in your perfect Dalton family story. Margaret stood. Enough of this philosophical nonsense. The fact remains, you're pregnant with another man's child, you've betrayed my son, and you've created a scandal that could damage our family's reputation. She pulled an envelope from her dress pocket. There's $500 here. More than generous under the circumstances. Take it, disappear to California or Oregon, and we'll tell people the engagement ended by mutual agreement. Rebecca stared at the envelope. $500 was more money than she'd ever seen at once, enough for train passage and several months of living expenses. It was also blood money, payment to disappear quietly while they controlled the narrative. You want me to vanish, she said slowly. Pretend this never happened. Let you save face. It's more kindness than you deserve, Margaret replied. Take it or leave it, but either way, you're off this property by sunrise. And if I refuse, if I stay in Rawlins, tell people the truth. Vincent spoke then, his voice flat. Then you'll discover exactly how much influence the Dalton name carries. No one will hire you. No one will rent to you. You'll be driven out anyway, but with nothing instead of $500. The threat was delivered without heat, which made it more credible. Rebecca knew he wasn't exaggerating. The Daltons owned the bank, the general store, and half the buildings in Rawlins. They sat on every important board, knew every judge, controlled more political appointments than the governor himself. Where would I go? Rebecca heard the defeat in her own voice. My parents are dead. I have no siblings, no extended family. $500 won't last forever, especially with a baby. That's hardly our concern, Margaret said crisply. You should have considered the consequences before your indiscretion. The casual cruelty of it struck Rebecca like a slap. She'd lost both parents to influenza 2 years earlier, had worked herself to exhaustion, taking care of them through their final days while still teaching full-time. The Daltons knew this. Vincent had courted her partly because of it, the tragic orphan schoolteacher, beautiful and alone, perfect for rescue by the wealthy cattleman. Except he hadn't wanted to rescue her. He'd wanted to acquire her, another possession to display alongside his purebred horses and championship bulls. I'll need my teaching salary, Rebecca said, forcing practicality through her pain. September and October. You owe me 2 months of work. Before accepting Vincent's proposal, she'd worked as a teacher at the small schoolhouse in Rawlins. The pay had been modest but steady, and she'd continued teaching through the summer while planning the wedding. Vincent had convinced her to resign in August, assuring her she wouldn't need to work after they married. She'd been foolish enough to believe him. Vincent laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you're in a position to make demands? I think I'm owed wages for services rendered, Rebecca replied, channeling every ounce of dignity she possessed. Unless the Dalton family is in the habit of cheating their workers. The accusation hit its mark. The Daltons prided themselves on fair dealing in business, at least publicly. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she nodded curtly. Thomas will prepare your horse and your wages, but you leave tonight. If you're still on Dalton property come morning, we'll have Sheriff Crawford escort you out for trespassing. Rebecca climbed the stairs to the small guest room she'd used during her occasional stays at the ranch, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. Everything she'd built since her parents' death, the stability, the security, the promise of a future where she wouldn't wake up every morning wondering how to pay for food, was evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. She packed mechanically. 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible with the family records written on the flyleaf, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, the small carved box containing her grandmother's wedding ring, and the few dollars she'd managed to save from teaching. Everything else, the beautiful gowns Vincent had bought her, the expensive toiletries, the books he'd given her with his name inscribed on the flyleaves, she left behind. The engagement ring came off last. It was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, worth more than she'd earned in 5 years of teaching. She set it on the dresser without ceremony. It had never really been hers anyway. Through the window, she saw ranch hands gathering near the barn, and her stomach dropped. Michael, they would deal with him next. And the Daltons didn't believe in half measures. Sure enough, two men were escorting Michael toward the main house, his expression confused but wary. He'd been checking fence lines in the northern pasture all day, and probably had no idea why he was being summoned. Rebecca grabbed her packed bag and hurried down the back stairs. She had to warn him, had to at least give him a chance to defend himself before Vincent's rage landed on him. But she was too late. The study door was closed, but Vincent's roar penetrated the heavy oak like thunder. "You son of a bitch! Under my own roof!" Glass shattered. Something heavy hit the floor. Then Michael's voice, remarkably steady. She was alone, vulnerable. "You'd been gone for months, so you thought you'd help yourself? Comfort the poor, lonely woman?" Rebecca burst through the door without knocking. Vincent stood with his fist cocked back, blood trickling from Michael's split lip. Margaret watched from beside the fireplace, her expression calculating rather than shocked, as if she was assessing how this new variable affected her careful plans. "Stop!" Rebecca commanded. "This isn't his fault. I made the choice too." Vincent spun toward her, and for a moment she thought he might strike her as well. "Get out." "This doesn't concern you anymore. It concerns me more than anyone else in this room." Rebecca set her bag down, planting her feet. "And you'll listen before you beat your best foreman to death over your wounded pride." Vincent's hand trembled, but Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Let her speak, Vincent. Then she leaves, and we never have to see her face again." Rebecca drew a breath, marshalling her thoughts. In the past hour, something had crystallized inside her. A realization that she had nothing left to lose, which meant she finally had the freedom to speak truth without consequence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You want to know why, Vincent? I'll tell you exactly why." She met his eyes steadily. "In 6 months of engagement, you never once asked what I wanted, what I thought, what I feared. You showed me off at parties like a prize mare, discussed me with your business partners like I was another acquisition, planned our entire future without once consulting me about any of it. How dare you?" Margaret began. "I'm not finished." Rebecca cut her off, surprised by her own audacity. "Michael treated me like a human being. For one evening, I felt like more than an ornament for the Dalton family collection. That's why, Vincent. Not because I'm a whore, not because I'm ungrateful for everything you offered me. Because he saw me, really saw me, and you never did." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent's face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Rage, humiliation, something that might have been hurt if Rebecca believed him capable of that depth of feeling. Then Michael spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "I'll marry her." Everyone turned to stare at him. Even Margaret seemed momentarily struck speechless. "What did you say?" Vincent's voice was dangerously quiet. Michael straightened despite the blood on his face, despite his split lip, despite the fact that he was facing a man who could destroy his entire future with a word. "I'll marry her. Tonight. There's a preacher in Rawlins who'll perform the ceremony. She needs a name for her child, and I'm offering mine." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. She barely knew Michael beyond one night of conversation and vulnerability. They'd never discussed marriage, never talked about any kind of future. "This was insanity. You can't be serious," Margaret scoffed. "You'll be unemployed the moment you walk out that door. No rancher in Wyoming will hire Vincent Dalton's cuckolded foreman. How exactly do you plan to support a wife and child?" Michael's jaw set. "I've been saving my wages for 5 years. I've got enough for land for a start. It won't be luxury, but it'll be honest work and a roof over our heads." "You're throwing away your career," Vincent said, something strange in his voice. "Your reputation, for what? A woman who betrayed her fiancé? A child that isn't even yours? For a chance at building something real," Michael replied simply. "Maybe that doesn't mean much to people who inherited everything, but it means something to me." The insult landed. Vincent's family wealth had been built by his grandfather and father. He'd been born into success, never had to scratch for anything in his life. Rebecca found her voice. "Michael, you don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything." He turned to her. And she saw something in his eyes she'd only glimpsed that one night, a deep loneliness that mirrored her own, a hunger for connection that went beyond physical need. "I know I don't have to," he said quietly, "but I'm offering." Not out of obligation, not out of pity. Because that night we talked, I saw someone who understood what it felt like to be invisible in a crowd. Someone who valued ideas over appearances. Someone I could maybe build a life with if we're both brave enough to try. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more honest and somehow more valuable. A proposal based on mutual respect and shared loneliness rather than romance or passion. Rebecca looked between the two men before her. Vincent, handsome and powerful and utterly incapable of seeing past his own wounded ego. And Michael, offering her not rescue but partnership. Not comfort but honesty. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Rebecca watched Michael's expression shift from determination to something softer, almost vulnerable, as if he hadn't quite believed she would accept until the word left her lips. Vincent broke the silence with a laugh that held no warmth. "This is insane. Both of you have lost your minds." "Perhaps," Michael agreed, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "But it's our decision to make." Margaret moved from the fireplace, her silk dress rustling with each deliberate step. "You understand what you're condemning yourself to? A foreman's wages barely support one person, let alone a family. You'll be living in some drafty shack, watching your wife's hands crack from washing clothes, watching her child go without proper clothing or education. Better a drafty shack with dignity than a mansion where I'm invisible," Rebecca interjected. She was surprised by how quickly the decision had solidified in her mind. 5 minutes ago, she'd been contemplating a lonely exile with $500 and no prospects. Now she had an alternative that was equally terrifying, but somehow felt less like defeat. "Noble sentiments," Vincent said bitterly. "Let's see how noble you feel in 6 months when you're freezing through a Wyoming winter with a newborn and no money for a doctor." Michael stepped closer to Rebecca, not touching her, but positioning himself as a clear barrier between her and the Daltons. "We'll manage. People have survived on less. Get out." Vincent's composure finally cracked completely. "Both of you off my property within the hour. And Brennan, if I see your face anywhere near my cattle, my land, or my business interests, I'll have you arrested for theft. I'll claim you stole from the ranch accounts, stole equipment, stole whatever I need to claim, to see you behind bars." "Vincent," Margaret's voice carried a warning note. "No, Mother. He betrayed me. She betrayed me. They deserve whatever comes next." Vincent turned his back on them, staring out the window at the sunset, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "You have 1 hour. Thomas will have horses ready. After that you're trespassing, and I'll treat you accordingly." Michael touched Rebecca's elbow gently. "Get your things. I'll meet you at the barn." They left the main house separately, Michael heading toward the bunkhouse to collect his belongings, Rebecca returning to the guest room for her already packed bag. The house felt different now, hostile in a way it hadn't been even an hour before. The beautiful furnishings seemed less like luxury and more like trappings of a life that would have slowly suffocated her. At the barn, Thomas Patterson, the head wrangler, was saddling 2 horses with an expression of studied neutrality. He was an older man, weathered by decades of ranch work, and he'd always been kind to Rebecca in a distant, courteous way. "Miss Hart," he acknowledged, then corrected himself. "Or I suppose it'll be Mrs. Brennan shortly." "News travels fast," Rebecca observed. "Travels instantly when there's shouting involved." Thomas tightened the cinch on a sturdy bay mare. "This one's gentle but strong. She'll carry you steady. The gelding's for Brennan. Good mountain horse. Sure-footed." "Thank you." Rebecca appreciated his lack of judgment, the simple professionalism in his assistance. Thomas pulled an envelope from his vest pocket. "Your teaching wages. Mrs. Dalton had me collect them from the house account." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "There's a bit extra. Call it severance pay that I'm authorizing as head of ranch operations." Don't tell Vincent. Rebecca took the envelope, its weight surprising. Thomas, you could lose your position. I'm 63 years old, and too good at my job for Vincent to fire over a small discrepancy in the books. His weathered face cracked into a slight smile. Besides, I've known that boy since he was in diapers. Someone needs to remind him that power doesn't make you right. The unexpected kindness threatened to crack Rebecca's carefully maintained composure. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. Build something good out of this mess. Thomas handed her the mare's reins. There's supplies in the saddlebags. Food, a bedroll, some medical items. Not much, but enough to get you started. Michael appeared from the bunkhouse carrying a worn leather bag and a rifle. His face was set in grim lines, the split lip already swelling. He nodded to Thomas, who nodded back with a respect that spoke of years of working together. The preacher in Rawlins, Thomas said. Reverend Samuel Walsh. He'll do the ceremony without asking too many questions, especially if you tell him I sent you. We served together in the war. I'm in your debt, Michael said quietly. Just treat her right. That's all the debt I need paid. Thomas glanced toward the main house, where lamplight was beginning to glow in the windows. You should go. Vincent's in a state, and there's no telling what he might do if he works himself up further. They mounted in silence and rode out as the last light faded from the sky. Rebecca looked back once at the Crossroads Ranch. The sprawling main house, the neat outbuildings, the corrals full of expensive horses, all of it representing a life she'd almost lived. She felt no regret, which surprised her. Only a strange sense of relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for 6 months and could finally exhale. The ride to Rawlins took 90 minutes through gathering darkness. Neither of them spoke much beyond practical matters. Warnings about low branches, observations about the trail conditions. Rebecca's mind churned with questions she didn't quite know how to ask. Who was this man she was about to marry? Beyond one night of conversation and the decision he'd made in Vincent's study, she knew almost nothing about Michael Brennan. Rawlins appeared as scattered points of lamplight in the valley below them. It was a small town, maybe 300 people, built around the railroad stop and serving the surrounding ranches. Rebecca had taught at the schoolhouse for 2 years before Vincent's courtship had pulled her into a different world. The preacher lives behind the church, Michael said, breaking the long silence. Small house with a white fence. I've met him a few times at town gatherings. What if he refuses? Rebecca asked. What if news has already reached town? Then we ride to the next town, and the next until someone agrees. Michael's voice carried quiet determination. I gave my word. I don't break promises. The church sat at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a modest bell tower. The adjacent house was dark, except for a single window glowing with lamplight. Michael dismounted and helped Rebecca down, his hands careful and respectful as they steadied her. Let me do the talking, he suggested. At least at first. Reverend Walsh answered the door in shirt sleeves and suspenders, a book in one hand and spectacles perched on his nose. He was perhaps 50, with thinning grey hair and the comfortable build of a man who enjoyed his wife's cooking. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to surprise as he recognized Michael. Brennan, what brings you out after dark? Then his eyes found Rebecca, and understanding dawned. I see. Thomas Patterson said you might be willing to help us, Michael said. We need to be married. Tonight, if possible. Walsh studied them both, his gaze sharp behind those spectacles. There are proper procedures, young man. Banns need to be read, licenses obtained. There isn't time for proper procedures, Michael interrupted. And I suspect you can guess why. The Reverend's attention fixed on Rebecca, noting details she hadn't realized were visible, the slight pallor of her face, the way her hand unconsciously rested on her still, flat stomach, the absence of the expensive engagement ring she'd worn around town for months. Come inside, Walsh said finally, stepping back from the door. Martha, put on tea, he called over his shoulder. The interior of the house was warm and cluttered with books, very different from the sparse elegance of the Dalton residence. Martha Walsh emerged from the kitchen, a round woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron. She took one look at Rebecca's face and immediately pulled out a chair at the dining table. "Sit, dear. You look ready to fall over." Over tea and fresh bread, the story emerged in fragments. Michael did most of the talking. His version edited but honest. A moment of weakness, a child on the way, his offer of marriage to provide respectability and support. Rebecca appreciated that he didn't try to paint it as a love story or make excuses that would insult everyone's intelligence. Reverend Walsh listened without interruption, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Michael finished, the Reverend turned to Rebecca. "And you, Miss Hart, you're entering this marriage of your own free will? No one is coercing you?" Rebecca met his eyes directly. "I'm choosing this. Not because I have no other options. The Daltons offered me money to disappear. I'm choosing this because I believe Michael Brennan is a good man who's offering me partnership rather than ownership. That's more than most marriages start with." Something in Walsh's expression softened. "You were a teacher at the schoolhouse, weren't you? I remember you did fine work with the children." Some of the older boys who'd never cared for learning started attending regularly. "I tried to make lessons relevant to their lives," Rebecca said. "Ranching families need practical mathematics and reading skills, not just Latin declensions." Sensible approach. Walsh glanced at his wife, who gave a small nod. "All right, I'll perform the ceremony, not because I approve of the circumstances, but because I believe every child deserves to be born into a legitimate household if possible." He stood, moving to a shelf and pulling down a worn Bible. "Martha, would you and I serve as witnesses?" "Of course." Martha squeezed Rebecca's hand. "Do you have something borrowed?" "Traditional to have something borrowed for luck." Rebecca shook her head mutely. She'd left everything of value at the Dalton ranch. Martha disappeared briefly and returned with a delicate lace handkerchief. "This was my mother's. Bring it back sometime and we'll have tea properly. I'd like to hear how you're managing." The ceremony was brief, conducted in the Walsh's small parlor, with the lamp casting warm light over the proceedings. Reverend Walsh read from the worn Bible with practiced ease, his voice lending dignity to a situation that could have felt tawdry or desperate. Michael's responses were steady, his hand warm when it took Rebecca's. When it came time for her vows, Rebecca's voice wavered only slightly. She was promising her life to a near stranger, binding her future to his on the basis of one honest conversation and a desperate decision made in Vincent Dalton's study. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Walsh closed the Bible. "May God grant you strength for the road ahead, because you'll need it." Michael didn't kiss her. They stood awkwardly for a moment before Walsh produced a marriage certificate and had them both sign. The scratch of the pen seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Where will you go?" Martha asked as she served more tea, clearly reluctant to send them back into the night. "North," Michael said. "There's land available near the Colorado border, good grazing country that the big ranchers haven't claimed yet. I've got enough saved to file a homestead claim and buy some starter stock." "That's a rough country," Walsh observed. "Isolated. The nearest town is probably 30 miles, which means we'll be far from people who might cause trouble," Michael replied. His meaning was clear, far from Vincent Dalton's influence and reach. Rebecca's hands wrapped around her teacup, absorbing its warmth. "How long until we reach this land?" 3 days hard riding, maybe 4 at an easier pace." Michael looked at her with concern. "We can take it slow. There's no rush now." "Actually, there is." Walsh leaned forward. "Vincent Dalton was in town 2 days ago, talking about his upcoming wedding. By tomorrow, people will know something went wrong. And when they start speculating about why his fiancée suddenly married his foreman instead," he trailed off meaningfully. "We should leave before dawn," Rebecca concluded, "before curiosity turns into gossip, and gossip reaches Vincent's ears." Martha stood decisively. "Then you'll sleep here tonight in the spare room. Leave at first light with food in your stomachs and supplies in your packs. They won't have you starting married life by sleeping rough when there's a bed available." They accepted gratefully. The spare room was small but clean, with a double bed covered in a wedding ring quilt. After Martha closed the door, Rebecca and Michael stood on opposite sides of the room, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation. "I'll sleep on the floor," Michael offered immediately. "I don't expect this marriage isn't—" "I know." Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "You're offering protection and respectability, not anything else. We barely know each other," Michael agreed. He pulled a blanket from the chest at the foot of the bed and arranged it on the floor. "Maybe someday that will change. Or maybe we'll be partners who share a name and nothing more. Either way, I won't press you for anything you're not willing to give." The promise meant more than he probably realized. After 6 months of Vincent's possessive courtship, the relief of being with someone who didn't view her as property was almost overwhelming. "Michael," Rebecca said as he settled onto his makeshift bed, "why did you really offer to marry me? You could have just quit, ridden away from the whole mess." He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. "Then because that night we talked, you asked me something no one had asked me in years. You asked what I wanted from life, not what I was doing or where I was going, but what I actually wanted. And when I told you I wanted land of my own, a place to build something permanent, instead of always working for someone else's dream, you didn't laugh. You understood. That's why you proposed marriage? Because I took you seriously?" "That's why I saw a possibility," Michael corrected. "The marriage proposal was because I'm tired of being alone, and I think you are too. Maybe we can be less alone together." It was perhaps the most honest foundation for a marriage Rebecca had ever heard. No false promises of love, no romantic delusions. Just two lonely people choosing to face an uncertain future as partners rather than strangers. "I think we can," she agreed softly. They left the Walsh home 3 hours before dawn. Loaded with supplies Martha had insisted they take: dried meat, flour, coffee, even a small bag of sugar that was worth its weight in silver on the frontier. Reverend Walsh pressed a folded document into Rebecca's hand, along with the marriage certificate. "A letter of introduction to a friend of mine, Dr. Benjamin Hayes, in Fort Collins. When your time comes, you'll need someone who knows what they're doing." Hayes is skilled and discreet. The thoughtfulness of it nearly undid Rebecca's composure. These people owed her nothing, yet they were offering assistance that might literally save her life in the months ahead. They rode north as promised, pushing through the pre-dawn darkness until the sun rose behind them, painting the plains in shades of amber and rose. Rebecca kept expecting to hear pursuit, to see Vincent's men thundering up behind them to drag her back or exact revenge on Michael. But the horizon remained empty except for distant antelope and the occasional hawk circling overhead. By noon, they'd crossed into territory Rebecca had never seen before, rolling grassland broken by rocky outcroppings and stands of pine. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that reminded her how far she was from the comfortable world she'd known. "There's a line shack about 2 hours ahead," Michael said, consulting the worn map he'd pulled from his saddlebag. "We can rest the horses and eat something more substantial than jerky." The line shack proved to be a rough cabin built into the side of a hill, used by cowboys during roundup season but currently abandoned. Michael checked it thoroughly before allowing Rebecca inside, making sure no wildlife had taken up residence. While he tended to the horses, Rebecca explored the cabin's single room. It was primitive: dirt floor, a stone fireplace, rough benches instead of chairs, a shelf bed built into one wall. But it was weatherproof and defensible, which she supposed were the primary requirements for survival in this country. Michael returned carrying their supplies and the rifle. "We'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll push on to the North Platte River, follow it west toward the mountains." "How much land did you say you'd saved for?" Rebecca asked, helping him arrange their supplies on the rough shelf that served as a pantry. "Enough for 160 acres under the Homestead Act, plus funds to buy some cattle and horses, build a cabin." He hesitated. "It's not much, Rebecca. Not compared to what you could have had." She thought about the Crossroads Ranch, with its imported furniture and crystal chandeliers, its staff of servants and thoroughbred horses. Then she thought about Vincent's cold eyes and Margaret's cutting remarks. The feeling of drowning slowly in expectations she could never meet "Tell me about this land," she said instead of responding to his implied apology. "What's it like?" Michael's expression softened, the swelling around his lip making his smile slightly lopsided. "Mountain valley, good grass, reliable water from a creek that runs year-round. There's timber for building, game for hunting. Winters will be harsh, but the summer grazing is excellent. A man could build something there, something lasting." "A man and his family," Rebecca corrected gently. He met her eyes, and she saw hope war with uncertainty in his expression. "A man and his family," he agreed. As twilight fell and they shared a simple meal of beans and coffee, Rebecca felt the enormity of what she'd done, settling over her like a physical weight. She'd burned every bridge, severed every connection to her old life, tied her fate to a man she barely knew based on a few hours of conversation and a desperate need to escape. It should have terrified her. Instead, watching Michael carefully bank the fire for the night and check the door latch with the thoroughness of someone who took responsibility seriously, Rebecca felt something unexpected stirring beneath her fear. Not love, not yet, but the fragile beginning of trust, and the strange conviction that she'd somehow made the right choice, even if she couldn't yet see where it would lead. The journey north took 6 days instead of the anticipated 4. Michael had underestimated how quickly Rebecca would tire, her body already beginning to show the subtle signs of pregnancy that she'd been too preoccupied to notice before. The bone-deep exhaustion that descended without warning, the sudden aversions to certain smells, the way her back ached after hours in the saddle. He never complained about their slower pace, never showed impatience when they had to stop for the 3rd time in an afternoon so Rebecca could rest. Instead, he adjusted their route to include known water sources and sheltered camping spots, making decisions that prioritized her comfort over speed. They crossed the North Platte River on the 7th day, the water running high and fast with early snowmelt from the mountains. Michael found a shallow ford that other travelers had marked with cairns of stacked stones, leading both horses across while Rebecca held tight to the saddle horn, her heart hammering at the rushing water that came up to the horses' chests. "Almost there," Michael called back to her over the roar of the river. "Another half-day's ride once we're across." The land beyond the river was different, wilder, less touched by settlement. They saw no homesteads, no fence lines, only endless grassland rolling toward distant mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the sky. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, the kind of landscape that could kill the unprepared or sustain those who learned to read its moods. Late afternoon sun was slanting golden across the plains when Michael reined in his horse at the top of a rise. "There," he said, and Rebecca heard the quiet pride in his voice. "That's home." The valley spread below them like a promise, a natural amphitheater carved by ancient water, surrounded on 3 sides by pine-covered slopes that would provide windbreak and timber. A creek meandered through the center, catching sunlight like scattered coins. Grass grew thick and green, already showing the first bronze touches of approaching autumn. "It's beautiful," Rebecca breathed, and meant it. The valley held none of the manicured elegance of the Crossroads Ranch, but it possessed something more valuable: potential, the raw possibility of becoming whatever they could build together. Michael dismounted and helped Rebecca down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "The creek never runs dry, even in drought years. I checked the land records going back 20 years. And see that southern slope? Protected from north wind but open to winter sun. That's where we'll build." They made camp that first night in a grove of aspens near the creek, both too exhausted from the journey for anything more ambitious than a simple meal and bedrolls spread on the ground. But the next morning, Michael was up before dawn, surveying the land with the careful eye of someone who'd worked cattle and understood terrain. "We'll need a dugout first," he explained as they shared coffee and cold biscuits. "A proper cabin will take weeks to build, and we don't have weeks before the weather turns. But a dugout can be ready in days, cut into that hillside, timber roof, stone chimney. It'll keep us warm through winter." Rebecca had never heard of a dugout. which must have shown on her face because Michael sketched it in the dirt with a stick, a dwelling carved partially into the hillside, using the earth itself for insulation. With only the front wall and roof exposed to the elements, it sounds like living in a cave, she said doubtfully. It'll be warmer than any cabin come January, Michael assured her, and drier than you'd think if it's built right. We can move into a proper house come spring. For the next 2 weeks, Rebecca discovered muscles she didn't know she possessed. Michael did the heavy excavation, digging into the hillside with a determination that would have been frightening if it wasn't so focused. But Rebecca hauled stones for the chimney, gathered clay from the creek bank for chinking, cut prairie grass for the roof thatch that would go beneath the sod. Her hands, which had been smooth from months of idleness as Vincent's fiancée, cracked and bled despite the tallow Michael rendered from a deer he'd shot. Her back ached constantly. She fell into her bedroll each night, too exhausted for conversation, let alone the marital expectations she'd been dreading. But something unexpected happened during those brutal weeks of labor. She grew stronger, not just physically, though her arms developed visible muscle and her stride became more confident across uneven ground. She grew stronger in herself, discovering a capacity for endurance she'd never needed to access during her teaching days or her brief time in the Dalton household. "You're a natural pioneer," Michael observed one evening as they surveyed the day's progress. The dugout was taking shape, walls of packed earth reinforced with timber, a stone fireplace that would heat the single room, windows that Michael had bartered for at a trading post 2 days' ride away. "I'm a desperate woman with no other choice," Rebecca corrected, but without bitterness. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Michael's gaze was thoughtful. "Seems to me desperation without capability just leads to failure. You've got the capability." The compliment warmed her more than it probably should have. Vincent had praised her beauty, her refinement, her suitability as a Dalton wife. But no one had ever acknowledged her competence. Her ability to learn and adapt and persist through difficulty. 3 weeks after their arrival, the first snow dusted the upper slopes of the surrounding mountains. Michael had been tracking the weather with growing concern, pushing them both harder to complete the dugout before winter arrived in earnest. "Storm coming," he announced one morning, studying clouds that were building to the northwest. "Big one, maybe tomorrow. We need to finish the roof today." They worked through daylight and into dusk, Michael laying the final timbers while Rebecca packed sod around the edges, creating a living roof that would shed water and provide insulation. Her hands were numb with cold by the time Michael declared it finished. But the structure was sound, a home carved from the hillside itself, ready to shelter them through whatever winter brought. That night, they slept inside the dugout for the first time. A fire crackling in the stone fireplace, their bedrolls spread on the dirt floor that Michael had swept clean. It was primitive compared to any dwelling Rebecca had ever inhabited, but it was theirs, built by their own hands from materials the land provided. "Thank you," she said into the firelit darkness. Michael stirred from his bedroll on the opposite side of the room. "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm fragile. For letting me work alongside you instead of trying to protect me from difficulty." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother raised 4 children on a homestead in Nebraska, worked harder than any man I've ever known, and never complained about it. I learned early that women are just as capable as men when they're allowed to be." "What happened to her?" Rebecca asked. "Your family?" "Scarlet fever when I was 15. Took all of them within a week. Mother, father, both brothers, my sister." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Rebecca heard the old pain beneath it. "I buried them in the garden plot my mother had tended for 10 years, sold everything and started drifting. That was 17 years ago. The revelation explained so much about Michael, his self-sufficiency, his comfort with solitude, the careful way he approached building anything permanent, as if he'd learned not to trust that what he created would last. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said inadequately. "It was a long time ago." Michael poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up toward the chimney. "I've been alone since, mostly by choice. worked for other people's dreams because building my own felt too risky. But something about finding you in Vincent's study that night, seeing someone else trapped by circumstances beyond their control, it reminded me that risk is just another word for possibility. Rebecca absorbed this, understanding for the first time that she wasn't the only one taking a leap of faith. Michael was risking as much as she was: his solitude, his carefully constructed emotional distance, his freedom to drift away when things got difficult. The storm arrived the next morning with a fury that justified Michael's urgency. Snow fell so thickly that Rebecca couldn't see the creek from their doorway, wind howling around the dugout like a living thing seeking entry. But inside, the fire burned steady, the earthen walls held firm, and they remained dry and relatively warm, despite the blizzard raging outside. "First test passed," Michael said with satisfaction, checking the roof for leaks. The dugouts sound. They were snowed for 3 days. During those long hours of forced proximity, Rebecca learned more about the man she'd married. Michael had educated himself through borrowed books and careful observation, could quote Shakespeare and calculate complex mathematical equations with equal facility. He'd worked ranches from Texas to Montana, learned animal husbandry and range management through experience rather than formal schooling. In turn, she told him about her childhood, the daughter of schoolteachers in a small Iowa town, raised on books and ideas, losing both parents within days of each other and finding herself suddenly alone in the world at 23. Her move to Wyoming had been a desperate flight from memories and loneliness, an attempt to start fresh in a place where she had no history. Vincent seemed like the answer, she admitted. Security, stability, a place to belong. I didn't realize the price would be my entire self. What about the baby's father? Michael asked carefully. Do you still have feelings for him? Rebecca considered the question honestly. I cared about you that night because you saw me as a person worth listening to. But love? No. It was loneliness and need and a moment of connection that meant more than it probably should have. I'm not offended, Michael said mildly. That's a more honest foundation than most marriages start with. At least we're clear about what this is and isn't. What is it? Rebecca asked. This marriage of ours. Michael fed another log to the fire, taking his time answering. I suppose it's two people choosing to face uncertainty together instead of alone. Choosing to build something instead of just surviving. Maybe that's enough to start with. When the storm cleared, they emerged to find the valley transformed, everything buried under 3 feet of snow, the creek frozen at its edges, the world reduced to white and blue, and the dark green of pine trees on the slopes above them. Michael strapped on snowshoes he'd crafted during the storm and began checking their supplies. They had enough food for perhaps 6 weeks if they were careful. Dried meat, flour, coffee, beans, the vegetables he'd bartered for and stored in the root cellar he'd dug behind the dugout. But winter in the mountains could last 5 months or more. I'll hunt, he decided. Deer are moving down from the high country now. If I can bring down an elk, we'll have meat through January. He left before dawn the next morning, rifle in hand, moving through the snow with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent half his life in the wilderness. Rebecca watched him disappear into the tree line, then turned back to the dugout and the work that awaited her. She'd been sewing by firelight, cutting down one of her old dresses to make baby clothes, her stitches careful despite hands that still bore calluses from construction work. The life inside her was beginning to feel real in ways it hadn't during their desperate flight from the Daltons. Small movements now, like butterflies trapped beneath her skin. Reminders that she was building not just a home, but a family. Michael returned that evening dragging a doe, triumph written across his features. She practically walked into my sights. Good omen, maybe. They spent the next 2 days processing the deer, Michael butchering with practiced efficiency, while Rebecca learned to slice meat thin for drying, to render fat for tallow, to scrape the hide clean for tanning. Nothing was wasted. Even the bones went into soup stock that would feed them for weeks. You're a quick study, Michael observed, as Rebecca worked on the hide with the scraping tool he'd fashioned. Most people raised in towns can't stomach this work. Most people raised in towns haven't faced the alternative of starving, Rebecca replied. But she took private satisfaction in her growing competence, in the way her body was adapting to this harsh new life. As November gave way to December, they settled into a rhythm. Michael hunted and repaired equipment and cut firewood from dead timber on the slopes. Rebecca cooked, sewed, maintained the dugout, and began experimenting with the clay she'd discovered near the creek, shaping crude bowls and cups that she fired in the hottest part of their fireplace. They were still sleeping on opposite sides of the room, still maintaining a careful physical distance, despite the intimacy of sharing such close quarters. But they talked more, shared stories and ideas during long evenings by the fire, developed the kind of companionship that came from mutual respect and shared purpose. One night, as they discussed plans for spring planting, Rebecca felt a particularly strong movement from the baby. She gasped, her hand going to her belly. "What's wrong?" Michael was at her side immediately. "Nothing's wrong. The baby's just very active tonight." She hesitated, then made a decision. "Do you want to feel?" Michael's expression cycled through surprise, uncertainty, and finally curiosity. "Are you sure?" In answer, Rebecca took his hand and placed it on her belly where the movement was strongest. They waited in silence, and then the baby kicked again, a solid thump against Michael's palm. His face transformed with wonder. That's incredible. There's really a person growing in there. A very energetic person," Rebecca agreed with a small smile. "I think this child is going to be a handful." Michael's hand remained on her belly, his touch gentle and respectful. "I meant what I said to Vincent. This child will be mine in every way that matters. Blood doesn't make a father, choice does. Showing up every day does." The simple declaration moved Rebecca more than flowery promises of love ever could. This was the man she'd married, steady, honest, willing to claim responsibility, not because obligation demanded it, but because he'd chosen to make it so. "I believe you," she said quietly. As winter deepened, the valley became their entire world. Snow piled so high that the dugout was nearly buried, making it even warmer inside. They lived by firelight and the stories they told each other, by the slow passing of days, marked only by the gradual changes in Rebecca's body as pregnancy advanced. Michael crafted a cradle from pine, working carefully in the corner of the dugout during evening hours. Rebecca sewed blankets from fabric she'd brought and from wool she traded for when a traveling peddler passed through in late December, a rare visitor who brought news from the outside world. "There's talk in Rawlins," the peddler mentioned casually as he examined. "Their meager trade goods? About Vincent Dalton's missing fiancée. Some say she ran off with Indians, others say she's dead. Dalton himself isn't saying much, but his mother's been spreading stories about unstable women and broken engagements." Rebecca and Michael exchanged glances but said nothing. Let the Daltons control their narrative. Here in this isolated valley, it didn't matter what Carbon County believed. After the peddler left, Michael pulled out the document Thomas Patterson had given them, Rebecca's teaching wages, and the mysterious extra money. They counted it carefully by firelight. $700, far more than they'd expected. Thomas added 400, Rebecca calculated. That's nearly a year's wages for a head wrangler. "That's a man who understands that sometimes the right thing costs money," Michael replied. "With this, we can buy breeding stock come spring. Build a real herd instead of just subsisting." They made plans late into that night, sketching their dreams in the dirt floor near the fire. 20 head of cattle to start, 2 good horses for working stock, chickens for eggs and meat, maybe a milk cow. A proper cabin with 2 rooms instead of 1, a barn for winter shelter, fencing for pastures, and a vegetable garden. "We'll need help," Michael mused. "Can't run cattle alone once we're up to 50 head or more." "Then we'll hire someone when the time comes," Rebecca replied. "Someone who needs a second chance, like we did." The idea pleased them both, the thought of creating not just a homestead, but a community, however small, of people helping each other survive and perhaps even thrive. Christmas came and went with little ceremony. They had no decorations, no special food, but Michael surprised Rebecca with a gift, a small wooden box he'd carved with surprising skill, lined with soft deerskin, for keeping precious things, he explained almost shyly. Your mother's Bible, your grandmother's ring, anything you want to protect. Rebecca's eyes burned with unexpected tears. It's beautiful. I have nothing for you. You gave me a reason to build something permanent, Michael replied simply. That's gift enough. January brought the coldest weather yet, temperatures so low that the water bucket froze solid overnight, despite being kept inside. But the dugout's design proved its worth. The earthen walls held warmth, the banked fire never went completely out, and they remained comfortable enough to joke about the pioneers who tried to winter in canvas tents and log cabins. Rebecca's belly was unmistakably round now. Her pregnancy obvious, even beneath loose clothing. Moving was becoming awkward, and she tired more easily, but she refused to become an invalid. She continued her work, cooking, sewing, maintaining their living space with stubborn determination. You should rest more, Michael advised one afternoon, finding her struggling to haul water from the creek. I'll rest when I'm dead, Rebecca retorted, then caught herself. That came out more morbidly than intended. Michael took the bucket from her hands. I'll haul water. You can render the tallow from yesterday's rabbit. Fair division of labor? They developed this pattern, negotiating tasks based on capability and energy rather than rigid gender roles. Michael cooked as often as Rebecca did. She helped with equipment repair when her hands were needed. They approached survival as genuine partners, each contributing according to their strengths. By February, the worst of winter was past. Chinook winds brought temporary thaws, revealing patches of brown grass that made the horses whinny with eagerness. Michael began preparing for spring, inventorying supplies, planning improvements, discussing with Rebecca the logistics of her coming confinement. We should send for Dr. Hayes, he said one evening. The letter Reverend Walsh gave us, we could get word to him, have him come when your time is close. Rebecca touched her belly, feeling the baby's movements that were growing stronger every day. Fort Collins is at least a week's journey. How would we know when to send for him? We'll send in March, Michael decided. Better to have him arrive early than risk him being late. The practicality of the discussion, treating childbirth as a logistical challenge, to be managed rather than a mysterious feminine ordeal, somehow made Rebecca less anxious about what awaited her. Michael's calm competence was contagious, his assumption that they would handle whatever came next, based on preparation and common sense. As March arrived with its unpredictable mix of snow squalls and warm sunshine, Rebecca looked around the dugout that had become home. It was crude, certainly nothing like the houses she'd lived in before, yet she felt more at peace within its earthen walls than she'd ever felt in the Dalton mansion, or even in her parents' comfortable Iowa farmhouse. This place was hers, in a way those others never had been. Built by her own hands, defended by her own choices, filled with possibility that she and Michael were creating together one difficult day at a time. What are you thinking? Michael asked, catching her contemplative expression. That I'm glad, Rebecca replied honestly. Glad that letter arrived early. Glad Vincent showed his true nature before I married him. Glad I met a man strange enough to propose marriage to his employer's pregnant fiancée. Michael's rare smile appeared. Strange or desperate? Both, Rebecca decided. But it worked out well for both of us, didn't it? Outside, the creek was running high with snowmelt, carrying away the last remnants of winter. Spring was coming, bringing with it new challenges and possibilities in equal measure. But for the first time since her parents' death, Rebecca felt ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Michael. They'd built something real from desperation and chance, not romantic love, perhaps, but something potentially more durable, partnership, respect, and the shared conviction that they could survive anything as long as they faced it together. Spring arrived in earnest during the second week of March. transforming the valley overnight from monochrome white to a patchwork of brown earth and emerging green. The creek swelled to twice its winter size, rushing with snowmelt that thundered even inside the dugout. Michael spent his days checking the structural integrity of their home, ensuring the unexpected thaw wouldn't undermine the hillside or flood their carefully constructed sanctuary. Rebecca stood at the doorway watching him work, one hand pressed against her lower back where a persistent ache had settled. 8 months pregnant now, her body felt foreign to her, swollen and ungainly, moving through the world with a careful waddle that would have mortified her a year ago. Now she simply accepted it as a temporary inconvenience, another challenge to navigate. "I'm riding to Johnson's trading post tomorrow," Michael announced over their evening meal. "We need supplies before the baby comes, and I want to send word to Dr. Hayes that he should start this direction." Johnson's was a 2-day journey, a full day's ride there. Time to conduct business, then another day back. Rebecca tried to keep the anxiety from her face. She'd never been alone here, not for more than a few hours while Michael hunted nearby. "I'll be fine," she assured him, reading the concern in his expression. "The baby's not due for at least 3 more weeks, and it's probably longer for first children." "You've told me that yourself. Babies don't follow calendars," Michael replied, though he nodded in acceptance. "But you're right. We need those supplies, and Hayes needs warning. I'll leave at first light and be back by evening the day after tomorrow." He spent that night reviewing everything Rebecca might need in his absence, where the extra firewood was stacked, how to bar the door if she felt threatened, the location of the loaded rifle he kept above the fireplace. She listened patiently, understanding that his instructions were as much about managing his own worry as ensuring her safety. "I've survived 8 months in the wilderness," she reminded him gently. "I think I can manage 48 hours alone." Michael's expression softened. "I know you can. Doesn't stop me worrying about things I can't control." He left before dawn as promised, riding the sturdy gelding and leading a pack horse for carrying supplies back. Rebecca stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared over the eastern ridge, then turned back to the dugout and the solitary day ahead. She spent the morning on necessary tasks, baking bread, mending a tear in Michael's spare shirt, organizing the baby clothes she'd sewn over winter. The cradle sat in the corner, waiting. She'd lined it with soft rabbit fur and the precious fabric scraps she'd hoarded. Everything was as ready as it could be. By afternoon, restlessness drove her outside despite the persistent backache. The sun was warm, the valley alive with birdsong and the rushing creek. She walked the perimeter of their homestead, noting where Michael had started clearing ground for the vegetable garden, where he planned to build the barn once they had livestock to shelter. This land was theirs now, officially filed with the Territorial Land Office, their names on documents that made them legal claimants to 160 acres of possibility. The thought still amazed her. 6 months ago she'd owned nothing, had been nothing except Vincent Dalton's decorative fiancé. Now she was a landowner, a pioneer, a woman building something permanent. The backache intensified as she walked, radiating around to her belly in waves that made her pause and breathe carefully. Not contractions, she told herself firmly. Just the discomfort of carrying extra weight, of a baby pressing on nerves and organs. Dr. Chen's pamphlet on childbirth had mentioned this, false labor pains that could occur. Weeks before actual delivery, she returned to the dugout as the sun began its descent, the ache now impossible to ignore. Perhaps she'd overdone the walking. Rest would help. She settled onto her bedroll with a cup of tea, willing her body to relax. The pain woke her hours later, a sensation entirely different from the ache that had plagued her all day. This was sharp, purposeful, a tightening across her belly that built to a crescendo before slowly releasing. Rebecca lay in darkness, counting seconds until the next contraction arrived. 20 minutes, then another contraction, this one stronger, then 18 minutes until the third. No, this couldn't be happening. Michael was a full day's ride away. Dr. Hayes was still in Fort Collins, not even aware he was needed. The baby wasn't due for 3 more weeks. Rebecca forced herself to breathe through the rising panic. She'd read about labor, had listened to Martha Walsh describe what to expect, had even helped deliver a calf once when she was teaching in Rawlins and staying with a ranching family. Birth was a natural process. Women had been managing it since the beginning of human existence. She could do this. Another contraction hit, harder than the others. Rebecca gripped the edge of her bedroll, counting through the pain. 15 minutes since the last one. They were getting closer together. She lit a lamp with trembling hands and began preparing as best she could. Water heated over the fire, clean cloths laid out. The knife Michael used for careful work, sterilized in boiling water the way she'd read about in her mother's medical book. String for tying the cord. Blankets warmed near the fire. The contractions intensified through the night. Rebecca paced when she could, clutching the rough timber supports when pain made standing impossible. She talked to herself, to the baby, to Michael, though he was miles away and couldn't hear. "You're coming early, little one. That's inconvenient timing, but we'll manage. We always manage." Dawn broke grey and cloudy, and Rebecca realized with clinical detachment that she'd been in labor for nearly 8 hours. The contractions were 5 minutes apart now, powerful enough to make her cry out despite her determination to stay quiet. There was no one to hear anyway, no one to judge her for weakness. By mid-morning, the urge to push became overwhelming. Rebecca arranged herself on the bedroll, her back against the rough wall, and gave in to what her body demanded. She'd never experienced anything like this. Pain so all-consuming it erased thought, instinct taking over where knowledge failed. Time lost meaning. There was only the cycle of pain and brief respite, the overwhelming pressure, the certainty that her body was tearing itself apart, even as some distant part of her brain insisted this was normal. This was how life entered the world. A sound outside penetrated her awareness, hoofbeats, rapid and approaching. Rebecca's heart leaped. Michael had returned early somehow, had sensed something was wrong and turned back, but the voice that called out wasn't Michael's. "Mrs. Brennan. Rebecca Hart Brennan? Are you here?" Rebecca froze, even between contractions. That voice was cultured, educated, utterly unexpected in this isolated valley. Through the open door, she'd left it ajar for air, she saw a figure dismounting from a fine horse that had no business on frontier trails. The man who appeared in the doorway was perhaps 45, well-dressed despite obvious travel wear, with the kind of groomed beard that spoke of civilization and money. He took in the scene with professional efficiency, Rebecca in obvious labor, alone, unprepared for what was happening. "Dr. Benjamin Hayes," he introduced himself, already moving into action. "Reverend Walsh's friend. I received word yesterday from a rider heading east that you might need assistance soon. Seems my timing is better than expected." Rebecca could have wept with relief. "How did you find us?" Michael Brennan is apparently well known at Johnson's trading post. The proprietor gave excellent directions. Hayes was washing his hands in the heated water, rolling up his sleeves. "Now let's see how this baby is progressing. When did contractions start?" Under his calm guidance, the terror of solitary childbirth transformed into something manageable. Hayes examined her with professional detachment, asking questions about timing and sensations, his presence turning chaos into medical procedure. "You're very close," he announced. "Another few hours at most." "You're doing excellently, Mrs. Brennan." The encouragement meant more than it should. Another contraction seized her, and Hayes coached her through it with specific instructions about breathing and pushing that actually helped. "Have you chosen a name?" he asked during a brief lull, clearly trying to keep her focused on something beyond pain. "Not yet. Michael and I couldn't agree. He likes Charlotte for a girl. I prefer Anna. For a boy, we thought perhaps Thomas, after the man who helped us. Both fine choices." Hayes checked her progress again. "All right, next contraction. I need you to push with everything you have." The baby's ready to be born. What followed was the most intense physical experience of Rebecca's life. Following Hayes's instructions, she pushed through pain that seemed impossible to endure, then had to somehow find strength to push again and again, while Hayes maintained a steady stream of encouragement and guidance. "I can see the head. One more, Rebecca. One more good push. She bore down with the last reserves of her strength, feeling something give way, and suddenly the pressure released in a rush. Hayes caught the infant with practiced hands, his expression transforming into a smile. A daughter. A healthy, perfect daughter. The baby's cry filled the dugout. Strong, indignant, utterly alive. Hayes worked quickly, clearing the infant's airways, tying and cutting the cord, wrapping her in the warmed blankets Rebecca had prepared. Then he placed the tiny bundle in Rebecca's arms. She was impossibly small, red-faced and furious at her abrupt eviction from comfortable darkness. But her eyes, when they flickered open, were alert and curious. Dark eyes that would probably lighten over time, searching her mother's face with the intensity of one already trying to make sense of the world. "Hello, Anna," Rebecca whispered, the name deciding itself. "Hello, little warrior." Hayes completed his work with the efficiency of long practice, delivering the afterbirth, checking Rebecca for tears that required stitching, ensuring the bleeding was normal. He talked through each step, explaining what he was doing and why, treating her as an intelligent participant rather than just a patient. "You did remarkably well, especially for being alone," he said as he washed up afterward. "First babies are rarely this straightforward." "I wasn't alone once you arrived," Rebecca pointed out. "Your timing was miraculous. Divine intervention or simple luck, I'll take either." Hayes began repacking his medical bag. "I should mention, there was another rider at Johnson's trading post yesterday. A well-dressed gentleman asking questions about Michael Brennan and whether anyone knew where he'd settled." Rebecca's arms tightened protectively around Anna. "What kind of gentleman?" "Didn't give a name, but Johnson described him as wealthy, authoritative. Said he was offering money for information about a runaway couple, a foreman who'd stolen from his employer, and a disturbed woman the foreman had kidnapped. Vincent." The name hung unspoken between them. It had been 6 months. Rebecca had begun to hope he'd forgotten them, moved on to other concerns. Apparently she'd been naive. "What did Johnson tell him?" she asked, her voice steady despite rising fear. "Nothing. Johnson's not fond of wealthy men throwing their weight around, and he respects Michael. But the gentleman was heading north along the trade routes, asking at every settlement." Hayes met her eyes seriously. "He's hunting you, Mrs. Brennan. Eventually he'll find this valley." Before Rebecca could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside again. Michael returning from his journey. He appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and his face cycled through confusion, shock and wonder in rapid succession. "You had the baby," he said unnecessarily, crossing to Rebecca's side. "But it's early. Are you all right? Is she—" "We're both fine," Rebecca assured him. "Dr. Hayes arrived just in time." Michael shook Hayes's hand with visible gratitude, then turned his attention to the baby in Rebecca's arms. His expression as he looked at Anna was everything Rebecca could have hoped for, not tolerance or duty, but genuine wonder. "She's beautiful," he breathed. "Can I—" Rebecca carefully transferred the infant to Michael's arms, showing him how to support her head. He held Anna with surprising confidence, and the baby seemed to sense his steadiness, her fussing quieting as she gazed up at him. "Anna," Rebecca said, "if that's agreeable to you." "Anna Brennan." Michael tested the name. "It's perfect." He looked up, and Rebecca saw everything she needed to know in his expression. This child was his now, as completely as if she'd been born of his blood. "Welcome home, Anna." Hayes cleared his throat gently. "I hate to interrupt this moment, but we need to discuss the situation." "The man asking questions at Johnson's—" "I know," Michael interrupted, his jaw tightening. "I heard about him there. That's why I rode straight through instead of spending the night. I should have told you immediately, but then I saw—" He glanced down at Anna, his expression conflicted. "Vincent's hunting us," Rebecca stated flatly. "How long before he finds the valley?" "Could be weeks, could be days," Hayes said. "But Johnson mentioned this gentleman had hired local trackers, men who know this country." Michael carefully returned Anna to Rebecca's arms, his movements gentle, but his expression hardening into something dangerous. "Then we prepare." This is our land, legally filed. Vincent Dalton has no claim here, no authority. Men like that don't need legal claim, Hayes observed quietly. They make their own authority. The bitter truth of it settled over the dugout like frost. Rebecca looked down at Anna, now sleeping peacefully against her chest, blissfully unaware that her first day of life had already brought new threats. "What do we do?" she asked, hating the fear in her voice. Michael's hand found hers, his calloused fingers warm and steady. "We survive. We protect our family. And we make it clear that Vincent Dalton isn't taking anything from us ever again." Dr. Hayes stayed 3 days, ostensibly to ensure Rebecca's recovery, but clearly also concerned about leaving them alone, with Vincent's threat looming. During those days, the dugout became a strategic planning center as much as a nursery. "Your greatest advantage is the terrain," Hayes explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt floor while Anna nursed. "This valley is naturally defensible, limited access points, high ground surrounding it. Anyone approaching has to come through one of 2 passes, and both are visible from that ridge." He pointed toward the eastern slope. Michael studied the map with the intensity of a general planning battle. "I've been thinking about building a watchtower there anyway for spotting cattle. Could serve double purpose. How long would construction take?" Hayes asked. "A week if I work from dawn to dark. Less if I get help." Michael glanced at Rebecca, who was looking healthier despite having given birth just days earlier. Pioneer life had hardened her in ways that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. "I can help once I'm stronger," she offered. "Anna still sleeps most of the day still." Hayes frowned. "You should be resting at least 2 weeks, Mrs. Brennan. Childbirth takes an enormous toll on the body." "So does being unprepared when Vincent arrives," Rebecca countered. "I'd rather push my recovery than be caught helpless." The doctor's expression showed reluctant admiration. "You're unlike any patient I've ever had. Most women of your background would demand bed rest and laudanum. Most women of my background haven't had their lives depend on their own capabilities," Rebecca replied, adjusting Anna's position. "I learned quickly that survival doesn't wait for convenient timing." On his final morning, Hayes pulled Michael aside while Rebecca was occupied with the baby. Their voices carried through the open door where she sat in weak sunshine, letting Anna experience her first real warmth. "The baby is healthy. Rebecca is recovering well, but you need to understand the risks," Hayes was saying. "If Vincent brings armed men and you resist, people could die. Is this land worth that?" "It's not about land," Michael replied quietly but firmly. "It's about not running anymore, about standing for something instead of always drifting to the next temporary situation. Rebecca and Anna deserve roots, a home they don't have to abandon the moment someone powerful decides to take it. Noble sentiments. They won't stop bullets, no, but preparation might. And the law is on our side. This is legally filed homestead land. Vincent has no claim here," Hayes sighed. "Men like Dalton don't care about legal technicalities. They care about getting what they want, and apparently he wants his pride restored by dragging his former fiancée back to face consequences." "Then he's going to be disappointed," Michael stated flatly. "Because that's not happening." After Hayes departed with promises to send word if he heard anything useful, Michael threw himself into fortification efforts. The watchtower rose on the eastern ridge, a simple platform built into a sturdy pine, high enough to overlook both approaches to the valley. He cached supplies there: water, dried food, ammunition, blankets, a refuge if they needed to flee the dugout, or a defensive position if flight proved impossible. Rebecca recovered faster than expected, driven by necessity rather than medical wisdom. Within a week, she was walking the property again, Anna strapped to her chest in a sling Rebecca had fashioned from soft deerskin. The baby seemed content with the arrangement, sleeping peacefully against her mother's heartbeat, while Rebecca helped Michael stockpile firewood, organize their meager arsenal, and plan escape routes if defense failed. "You're pushing too hard," Michael cautioned one evening. Finding Rebecca pale and exhausted after hauling water from the creek. "We don't have the luxury of caution," she replied, though she accepted his help, lowering herself to sit. Every day Vincent doesn't find us is a gift, but gifts run out. April arrived with unpredictable weather. Warm days followed by sudden cold snaps that reminded them winter wasn't quite finished. Michael made a trip to a different trading post 40 miles west, where he purchased additional ammunition and traded for a second rifle. He returned with disturbing news. 2 men were asking about us there too. Different from the gentlemen at Johnson's, these were hired trackers, rough types. They had a description of you. Said they were looking for a kidnapped woman who needed rescuing from a dangerous criminal. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. So I've been upgraded from runaway fiancé to kidnap victim. How flattering that Vincent thinks I lack agency to make my own choices. The description was detailed, Michael continued, his expression troubled. Your height, your coloring, even mentioned the scar on your wrist from that kitchen accident last year. Someone who knows you well provided that information. Margaret Dalton, certainly. Vincent's mother would have been thorough, determined to track down the woman who'd humiliated her son and disrupted her carefully planned family dynasty. They're getting closer, Rebecca stated the obvious. How long do we have? The trader said the men were heading northeast, following rumors of a couple homesteading in the mountain valleys. Could be weeks before they work their way here, or they could arrive tomorrow if they get lucky with information. That night, Rebecca held Anna close, while Michael cleaned and loaded both rifles. The baby had begun to show personality, alert during evening hours, studying faces with intense concentration, making small sounds that weren't quite cries but clear communication attempts. She deserved to grow up safe, to never know fear the way Rebecca had known it during her engagement to Vincent. We could still leave, Michael offered quietly. Push north into Montana territory. Lose ourselves in the wilderness until Vincent gives up. He won't give up, Rebecca said with certainty. Men like Vincent don't accept defeat. They escalate. If we run, he'll chase us forever, and we'll always be looking over our shoulders. She met Michael's eyes. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of running. This is our land, our home. Let him come. Let him see what I've become since he tried to discard me like trash. Something fierce and proud lit Michael's expression. Then we stand. They spent the next week in heightened alertness. Michael took regular shifts at the watchtower, scanning horizons for approaching riders. Rebecca kept the rifles loaded and within reach, practiced quick evacuation plans while timing how fast she could gather essential supplies and reach the tree line with Anna. The attack, when it came, arrived with dawn on the first day of May. Michael was at the watchtower during his regular morning watch when he spotted them. 5 riders cresting the eastern ridge, moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of travelers. He fired the warning shot they'd arranged, one crack echoing across the valley. Rebecca was moving before the echo faded. Anna into the sling against her chest, rifle in hand, emergency pack on her back. She reached the designated meeting point, a dense stand of aspens halfway up the western slope, in under 5 minutes. Michael appeared moments later, breathing hard from his sprint down from the watchtower. 5 men. Vincent's leading them. I recognized him through the scope. Armed? Rebecca asked, checking her rifle's load with steady hands despite her hammering heart. All of them. And they're not approaching like men looking for conversation. They watch from cover as the riders reach the valley floor. Vincent sat on his horse like a conquering general, flanked by 2 rough-looking men who were clearly the hired trackers. Behind them rode 2 others. Rebecca recognized one as Jackson, the ranch hand who'd been in the study that terrible night 6 months ago. Vincent surveyed the valley with visible satisfaction, taking in the creek, the grazing land, the dugout built into the hillside. Even from this distance, Rebecca could read his body language, the confidence of a man who believed victory was assured. He thinks we're just going to surrender, she murmured. Then he underestimated us significantly, Michael replied. He raised his voice, calling down to the riders. This is private property, legally filed under the Homestead Act. State your business or leave. Vincent's head snapped up, scanning the tree line for the voice's source. Brennan, I'm here for my fiancée. Send her down and we'll leave peacefully. Your former fiancée is my wife now, legally married. She's staying right where she is." One of the trackers, a lean man with a scarred face, laughed roughly. "You think we're asking permission?" Boss said, "Bring the woman back, that's what we're doing." "Boss is welcome to try," Michael called back. "But this valley has only two ways out, and we control the high ground on both. Anyone who tries to take something that's not theirs will find that very expensive." Vincent dismounted, his movements deliberate. "Rebecca," his voice carried clearly in the morning air, "I know you can hear me. This has gone on long enough. Come down now, and I'll overlook your indiscretion. You're obviously not thinking clearly. New mothers often experience mental disturbances. We'll get you proper medical care." The condescension in his tone made Rebecca's blood boil. She shifted Anna's weight slightly and called out herself, "I'm thinking perfectly clearly, Vincent. Clearer than I ever did while engaged to you. I'm not going anywhere." Silence followed her declaration. Then Vincent's voice, harder now, "You're my responsibility, Rebecca. Your father gave you to me to protect and provide for. I'm simply collecting what's mine. My father's been dead for months, and even he didn't own me," Rebecca shouted back. "I'm my own person, married to a good man, living on land that's legally ours. You have no claim here, no authority, no rights. Leave now while you still can." Vincent conferred briefly with his men. Even at this distance, Rebecca could see his anger in the rigid set of his shoulders, the sharp gestures. A man unaccustomed to being denied was learning that his will wasn't universal law. "Last chance, Brennan," Vincent called. "Send her down or we come up and get her." "Don't make this violent." Michael's answer was to fire a warning shot that kicked up dirt 10 feet in front of Vincent's horse. The animal shied, nearly unseating Vincent, who grabbed the saddle horn with a curse. "Next one won't be a warning," Michael stated flatly. "You're trespassing on homestead land. Under territorial law, I have the right to defend my property and family with lethal force, if necessary." The scarred tracker spat tobacco juice. 5 against 2. "You like those odds, mountain man?" 5 against 2 is bad odds, Michael agreed. "For you? You're exposed on the valley floor. We're in cover with higher ground. You'd be dead before you made it halfway up this slope." Rebecca could see the calculation happening among Vincent's hired men. They'd been paid for intimidation and retrieval, not a pitched battle against defended positions. The mathematics of survival were starting to undermine Vincent's confidence, but Vincent himself seemed past rational calculation, driven by wounded pride and thwarted entitlement. "Spread out," he ordered his men. "Circle around, find their position." The trackers exchanged glances but complied, beginning to move laterally along the valley floor. Michael tracked them with his rifle, speaking quietly to Rebecca. "When I fire, you take the one on the far right if he moves toward us. Don't aim to kill unless you have to. Wounding will stop them just as well and causes less legal trouble after." Rebecca settled her rifle against her shoulder, Anna secure in the sling but quiet, as if sensing the danger. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Thomas Patterson's extra money had bought them these rifles and ammunition. His quiet rebellion against Vincent's tyranny had given them the means to defend themselves. Michael fired, his bullet striking rock inches from the nearest tracker's boot. The man yelped and scrambled backward. Rebecca fired immediately after, her shot deliberately high, but close enough to make the rightward tracker dive for cover behind a boulder. "We can do this all day," Michael called down. "Can you? How much are you being paid, and is it enough to die for?" One of the ranch hands, the younger one, Miller, straightened from his defensive crouch. "Boss, maybe we should get back in position," Vincent snarled. "They can't hold that slope forever. They have a newborn baby up there. Eventually they'll have to come down," but they wouldn't, and Rebecca suspected Vincent knew it. They had supplies cached in the aspens, water from snow runoff that trickled down the slope. They could outlast any siege, especially since Vincent's men would need to return to civilization for food eventually. What happened next surprised everyone. A 6th rider appeared from the eastern pass, not one of Vincent's men, but someone riding hard, a badge glinting on his chest, visible even at distance. Federal Marshal Davis, the newcomer called, reining his horse between Vincent's scattered men. "Everyone lower your weapons right now." Michael and Rebecca exchanged surprised glances, but kept their rifles trained on Vincent's group. The marshal was perhaps 30, lean and weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent years settling frontier disputes. "Marshal," Vincent recovered quickly, turning on the charm like a lamp. "Thank goodness you're here. This man has kidnapped my fiancée, holds her captive in these mountains. I'm simply trying to rescue her." Davis looked unimpressed. "That's so. Funny thing, I got a telegram from Dr. Benjamin Hayes in Fort Collins, asking me to check on a homestead in this valley. Said there might be trouble from a man making false claims about a legally married couple." He pulled a document from his saddlebag. "Michael and Rebecca Brennan, married 6 months ago in Rawlins. Homestead claim filed proper and legal. That you folks up in those trees?" "It is," Michael confirmed. "And the man down there is Vincent Dalton, attempting to abduct my wife against her will." Davis turned to Vincent with raised eyebrows. "You want to dispute their marriage? I got the certificate right here, signed by Reverend Walsh. Seems legitimate to me." Vincent's face flushed dark red. "She was engaged to me first. Brennan stole her. A woman can break an engagement any time she wants," Davis interrupted. "That's not kidnapping. That's her exercising free choice. Now, you got any legal claim to this land or these people?" "She was carrying my child when she left," Vincent tried desperately. "That baby is mine by rights." The marshal's expression hardened. "You claiming paternity? Because if that's true, where were you 6 months ago when she was pregnant and alone? Why'd you let her ride off into the mountains if you cared about your child?" Vincent had no good answer for that. His whole story was collapsing under the marshal's practical questions, and even his hired men were looking uncomfortable with the situation. Rebecca made a decision. Still holding her rifle but lowering it slightly, she stood and walked to the edge of the trees where Vincent could see her clearly. Anna was visible in the sling, and Rebecca had never been more grateful for the baby's timing. "Vincent," she called down, her voice steady and clear. "Look at me. Really look at me. I'm healthy, I'm happy, I'm free. I'm living the life I chose, with a man who treats me as an equal partner, not a possession. Your mother offered me $500 to disappear. I took nothing. I built this life from scratch alongside Michael, and it's worth more than any comfort you could have provided." She adjusted Anna's position so Vincent could see the baby's face. "This is my daughter. Mine and Michael's in every way that matters. She'll grow up knowing her worth isn't determined by men who think money and power make them entitled to other people's lives. You have no claim here, Vincent. Not to me, not to her, not to this land. Go home. Let it go." The silence that followed was profound. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, waiting to see how Vincent would respond to this public rejection of everything he believed about his own importance. Finally, Vincent remounted his horse. His voice when he spoke was cold and flat. "You'll regret this, Rebecca. Both of you. I'll make sure of it." Marshal Davis moved his horse to block Vincent's path. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Dalton. Making threats against homesteaders is a federal offense. Want to rephrase that?" Vincent's jaw worked, but he stayed silent. "Thought not," Davis said. "Now you and your men are going to ride out of this valley and not come back. And if I hear about any accidents befalling the Brennans, any mysterious fires or stolen livestock or convenient legal troubles, I'm going to know exactly where to look." He paused significantly. "Sheriffs might be in your pocket down in Carbon County, but federal marshals answer to Washington, not local cattle barons." Vincent Dalton sat motionless on his horse for a long moment, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Rebecca could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing his options, measuring the cost of further confrontation against the satisfaction of dragging her back by force. The presence of Marshal Davis had changed the equation entirely. "This isn't finished," Vincent said finally, the words directed at Rebecca rather than the marshal. Then he wheeled his horse around and rode toward the eastern pass, without waiting to see if his men followed. The trackers exchanged glances and spurred their horses after him, clearly relieved to escape without violence. But the two ranch hands hesitated. Jackson, the older one, looked up toward where Rebecca stood at the tree line. "Mrs. Brennan," he called, "or Mrs. Wheeler, or whatever you're calling yourself now. I just want you to know what happened that night, what Mr. Dalton did to you. Some of us didn't think it was right. We just didn't know how to stop it." The admission hung in the air. Rebecca understood the courage it took to speak those words, to break ranks with an employer who controlled their livelihoods. "Thank you for saying that, Jackson. It matters," he nodded once, then followed the others toward the pass. Marshal Davis remained behind, watching until Vincent's group disappeared over the ridge before turning his attention back to the Brennans. "You two can come down now," he called. "Threats past, at least for today." Michael and Rebecca descended carefully, Michael keeping his rifle ready until they reached the valley floor. Davis dismounted and extended his hand to Michael, then tipped his hat respectfully to Rebecca. "Dr. Hayes painted quite a picture in his telegram," the marshal said. "Wanted me to check that you folks were all right, maybe to discourage any trouble before it started. Looks like I timed it well." "Your timing was providential," Rebecca agreed, adjusting Anna, who was beginning to fuss. "Though I'm curious how Dr. Hayes knew to contact you." Davis smiled slightly. "Hayes and I go back years. He patched me up after a shootout in Denver, probably saved my life. When he wires asking for help, I come running." His expression grew more serious. "But I need to be honest with you folks. My presence here today bought you time, not safety. Dalton struck me as the type who doesn't forgive being embarrassed in front of his hired men. What can he do?" Michael asked. "We're legal homesteaders, properly married. He has no claim." "Legal doesn't always matter when you're dealing with men who think money makes them above law," Davis replied. "Dalton could hire different men, come back when I'm not around. He could file false claims with the land office, tie you up in legal proceedings for years. He could make life difficult in ways that never quite cross into obvious criminality." Rebecca felt the truth of this settling over her like a cold blanket. Vincent had been thwarted today, but his pride wouldn't let him accept defeat. He would find other ways to punish her for the sin of choosing her own path. "So what do we do?" she asked. "Keep looking over our shoulders forever? Live in constant fear that he'll return?" Davis considered this carefully. "There might be another option. See, I've been tracking some suspicious activity in Carbon County. Cattle rustling on a large scale, altered brands, suspicious sales to buyers in Colorado. Nothing I can prove yet, but the pattern points to someone with resources and connections. Someone who needs to move a lot of stolen cattle without attracting attention." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You think Vincent's involved in rustling?" "I think someone operating out of the Crossroads Ranch is involved, whether that's Vincent himself or someone he's protecting. If I could prove it, I'd have leverage. Enough to make sure Dalton stays far away from you folks, because he'd be too busy defending himself against federal charges." "What would you need to prove it?" Rebecca asked, seeing where this was heading. "Evidence. Testimony from someone who worked the ranch and saw things. Documentation, if any exists." Davis looked at them steadily. "You both live there. You might know things that could help build a case." Michael shook his head slowly. "I never saw anything obviously criminal. Vincent ran the ranch efficiently, kept good records, treated his cattle well. If rustling was happening, it was hidden from the regular hands. What about paperwork?" Davis pressed. "Did you ever see bills of sale that seemed odd? Cattle counts that didn't match what was actually in the pastures?" Rebecca thought back to her time at the ranch, the weeks before she'd realized what a prison she was building for herself. Vincent had often worked late in his study, poring over ledgers and correspondence. She'd brought him coffee a few times, had glimpsed pages covered in numbers and ranch brands. "There was a locked cabinet in his study," she said slowly. "Vincent kept it locked even when he was in the room. Margaret once mentioned that he kept sensitive business matters there, things even she wasn't allowed to see." "That's interesting," Davis said. "Very interesting. A man with nothing to hide doesn't keep secrets from his own mother. But those records are in Vincent's house, under his control," Michael pointed out. "How would we possibly access them?" "We wouldn't," Davis agreed. "But there are other ways to gather evidence. Rustling operations need accomplices. Men who alter brands, who transport stolen cattle, who falsify sale documents. Someone always knows something, and people talk when they're offered the right incentives. Rebecca shifted Anna to her other shoulder, the baby now fully awake and demanding attention. What kind of incentives? Protection from prosecution if they testify. Relocation money if they need to leave the territory. Federal witness protection is a real thing, Mrs. Brennan. We take care of people who help us build cases against powerful criminals. An idea was forming in Rebecca's mind, audacious and risky. Jackson, she said suddenly. The ranch hand who just apologized to me. He's been at Crossroads for years, knows the operation inside and out, and he clearly has a conscience about what's been happening. Michael caught her implication. You want to approach him? That's dangerous, Rebecca. If he reports back to Vincent, he won't, Rebecca said with sudden certainty. Did you see his face? He's been carrying guilt about that night, about standing by while Vincent tried to kill me. Men like Jackson don't volunteer apologies unless something's eating at them. Davis looked intrigued. You think he'd be willing to talk? I think he might be looking for a way out, Rebecca replied. Vincent rules through fear and money, but fear only works until people get angry enough or scared enough to break free. Jackson looked like a man reaching that point. The marshal pulled a small notebook from his vest pocket. If you're serious about this, I need to know everything you remember about the ranch operations. Names of hands, buyers Vincent dealt with, anything unusual you noticed. Even small details can matter when building a case. They spent the next hour in the dugout, Anna nursing peacefully, while Rebecca and Michael recounted everything they knew about the Crossroads Ranch. Michael provided information about cattle movements, about shipments that sometimes occurred at night, about buyers who came through asking for cattle without particular brands. Rebecca recalled conversations she'd overheard, names Vincent mentioned, the tension that sometimes existed between Vincent and his brother Levi. Levi, Davis interrupted when Rebecca mentioned him. Vincent's younger brother, right? What's his role in the operation? He handles the financial records, Rebecca explained. Vincent didn't trust anyone else with the books. Levi's quiet, stays in his brother's shadow, but he's smarter than Vincent gives him credit for. Smart enough to know if something illegal was happening. Definitely. And conflicted enough that it might bother him. Rebecca remembered Levi's uncomfortable expression that terrible night, the way he'd avoided looking directly at her while following Vincent's orders. He's not cruel like Vincent, just weak. But weakness can be exploited if you offer the right alternative to continued complicity. Davis made extensive notes, asking clarifying questions, building a picture of the ranch operations from the perspectives of two people who'd seen it from inside. By the time he finished, the sun was past its zenith, and Anna needed changing. This is good information, Davis said, closing his notebook. Gives me direction for investigation. I'll start by talking quietly to some of the smaller ranches in Carbon County. See if anyone's noticed cattle disappearing or brands being altered. Then maybe I'll have a conversation with this Jackson fellow. See if he's as conflicted as you think. Be careful, Michael warned. Vincent has the sheriff in his pocket. If word gets back that you're investigating him, I've dealt with corrupt local law before, Davis assured him. I'll be discreet. And in the meantime, you folks should prepare for the possibility that Dalton tries something else. Keep watch, keep your rifles close, trust your instincts. After the marshal departed, promising to return with news within 2 weeks, Michael and Rebecca stood outside the dugout, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of coral and gold. Anna slept against Rebecca's shoulder, tiny fingers curled around a lock of her mother's hair. We stirred up trouble today, Michael said quietly. Might have been smarter to just let Vincent leave without engaging. Would he have left us alone if we'd stayed quiet? Rebecca challenged. Or would he have just come back better prepared, more determined? At least now we have an ally in Marshal Davis. We have the law on our side, not just Vincent's version of it. Michael's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close against his side. The gesture was protective, but also weary. the embrace of someone who'd been fighting for too long. I'm tired of this, Rebecca. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of planning for violence. I wanted this place to be a sanctuary, not a fortress. It will be, Rebecca said with more confidence than she felt. Once Vincent is dealt with properly. Once he's facing his own consequences instead of inflicting them on others. She turned to face Michael fully. We've survived everything that's been thrown at us so far. A barn where I was left to die. A winter in the mountains. Childbirth without a doctor until the last moment. Vincent's attempt to reclaim me by force. We're still standing. Still together. That has to mean something. It means we're stubborn, Michael replied, but his expression softened. And maybe a little bit blessed, though I'm not sure what we did to deserve it. Anna stirred between them, her small face scrunching in preparation for waking. Rebecca marveled at how much had changed in the 6 months since that terrible night at the Dalton ranch. She'd been a frightened woman then, pregnant and abandoned, certain she was dying alone in that barn. Now she was a mother, a homesteader, a woman who'd stood on a slope with a rifle and defended her chosen life against the man who'd tried to erase her. We should write to Dr. Hayes, she said suddenly. Thank him for contacting Marshal Davis. His intervention probably saved our lives today. I'll ride to the trading post tomorrow, send a letter, Michael agreed. And I'll see if there's been any more news about Vincent's movements. Johnson keeps his ear to the ground. If Dalton's planning something else, word might have reached him. That night, with Anna settled in her cradle and the rifles loaded beside the door, Rebecca lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the valley. An owl called from the ridge, hunting the darkness. The creek rushed with snowmelt, a constant background music to their lives. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, reminding her that danger came in many forms, not all of them human. "Michael?" she whispered into the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, I can't quite settle after today. Thank you," Rebecca said simply. "For everything. For proposing marriage when you didn't have to, for building this place, for standing with me against Vincent. You've given me and Anna more than safety. You've given us dignity, the chance to live as ourselves rather than as someone else's property." Silence stretched between them, and Rebecca wondered if she'd said too much, pushed into emotional territory that made Michael uncomfortable. Then his hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "I was half alive before I met you," Michael said quietly. "Going through motions, working jobs that meant nothing, building nothing permanent because I'd learned not to trust that anything lasted. You and Anna gave me purpose, a reason to put down roots instead of always preparing to drift away." He squeezed her hand gently. "So thank you too, Rebecca, for saying yes in Vincent's study, for trusting a near stranger with your life and your daughter's future. For being brave enough to build something instead of just running." Rebecca moved closer, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder, and they lay like that while the night deepened around them. It wasn't romance, not the passionate love that poets wrote about, but it was partnership, respect, and growing affection, perhaps a more durable foundation than passion ever could be. Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it new concerns and continued vigilance. Michael saddled his horse for the ride to Johnson's trading post, while Rebecca organized their supplies and checked their ammunition stores. The marshal's warning about Vincent's potential for retaliation couldn't be ignored. "I'll be back before dark," Michael promised as he prepared to leave. "Bar the door while I'm gone. Keep the rifle close. If anyone approaches who isn't me or Davis, get to the tree line like we planned." "I know the drill," Rebecca assured him. "We'll be fine. Anna and I have become quite competent at siege preparation." His smile was quick but warm. "My warrior women. I'll bring back news and whatever supplies Johnson has available." After he departed, Rebecca settled into the routine of the day, feeding Anna, washing their meager collection of clothes in the creek, preparing food for the evening meal. The normalcy of these tasks was grounding, a reminder that beneath the drama and danger, life continued in its essential patterns. Anna was particularly alert that morning, her dark eyes tracking movement, her tiny hands reaching for Rebecca's face with determined curiosity. She'd begun making new sounds, not just crying but experimental vocalizations, as if testing the range of communication available to her. "You're going to be a talker," Rebecca predicted, bouncing the baby gently. "Just like your mother. We'll have opinions about everything, won't we?" A sound outside froze her mid-sentence. Hoofbeats, but not from the eastern pass where Michael had departed. These came from the west, the secondary approach that fewer travelers used. Rebecca's heart hammered as she moved quickly to secure Anna in her sling, then grabbed the rifle from above the door. She positioned herself where she could see the approach without being easily visible from outside, just as Michael had taught her. The rider who emerged into the valley wasn't Vincent or any of his men. It was Levi Dalton, Vincent's younger brother, riding alone and looking nervously over his shoulder as if expecting pursuit. He reined his horse near the creek and called out, "Mrs. Brennan?" "Rebecca, I need to talk to you, please. I'm alone and I'm not here to cause trouble." Rebecca kept the rifle trained on him, her finger near the trigger. "Why should I believe that?" "Because Vincent doesn't know I'm here," Levi replied, dismounting slowly with his hands visible. "Because I've spent 6 months watching my brother become increasingly unstable, and yesterday's confrontation showed me that he's not going to stop. Someone needs to stop him, and I think I'm the only one who can." He reached slowly into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather-bound ledger. "These are Vincent's private records, the ones he keeps locked in his study. The ones that show exactly what he's been doing for the past 3 years. Levi looked up at Rebecca with desperate eyes. "I'm here to give them to Marshal Davis, but I need your help to do it without getting myself killed in the process." Rebecca maintained her aim on Levi for another long moment, studying his face for signs of deception. He looked exhausted, his clothes rumpled from hard riding, his eyes carrying the haunted expression of someone who'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "Put the ledger on the ground and step back," she instructed. Slowly, Levi complied, setting the leather-bound book carefully on the grass before retreating several paces with his hands raised. Rebecca approached cautiously, keeping the rifle ready while she retrieved the ledger with her free hand. Anna squirmed against her chest, sensing her mother's tension. The pages were filled with Vincent's precise handwriting, dates, cattle counts, brands, and sales figures. But interspersed throughout were entries in different ink, notations that made Rebecca's breath catch. Altered brands, cattle purchased from independent sellers with no names attached. Sales to Colorado buyers at prices well below market value, suggesting these were stolen animals being moved quickly. "This is evidence of systematic rustling," Rebecca said, flipping through pages. "Years of it. Vincent's been stealing from neighboring ranches and covering it with false paperwork. Over 3,000 head of cattle in the past 18 months alone," Levi confirmed, his voice hollow. "He'd send crews out at night to neighboring ranges, change the brands, move the cattle through our land, then sell them across the territorial line where no one would recognize them. The money went into a private account that even Mother doesn't know about." "And you kept the books," Rebecca stated flatly. "You enabled all of this," Levi's shoulders slumped. "I did. Vincent said it was just recovering what should have been ours anyway, that the land grants were unfair to original settlers like our father. I convinced myself I was protecting the family legacy." He met her eyes. "But that night in the barn, when I saw what he did to you, when I realized he was willing to murder his own fiancée and unborn child just to avoid scandal, I understood that I'd been lying to myself. My brother isn't protecting anything. He's a criminal who uses family honor as justification for cruelty." Rebecca lowered the rifle slightly, though she didn't set it down. "Why bring this to me? Why not go directly to Marshal Davis?" "Because I don't know where to find him, and Vincent has eyes everywhere in Carbon County. If I'd ridden to the territorial marshal's office, someone would have reported it before I arrived." Levi gestured toward the valley. "But Vincent doesn't watch this place. He's convinced you're trapped here, too afraid to leave. I could come here without him knowing." "Michael's gone to the trading post," Rebecca said. "He won't be back until evening." Then we wait. Levi replied simply. If you'll allow it. If not, I'll leave the ledger and disappear before Vincent realizes what I've done. Rebecca considered her options. Letting Levi stay was risky. He could be lying, could be leading Vincent here even now. But the ledger in her hands felt genuine, and the desperation in Levi's expression didn't seem feigned. More importantly, his testimony combined with this evidence could end Vincent's threat permanently. You can stay, she decided. But you'll do it unarmed and where I can watch you. Give me your weapons. Levi handed over a pistol and a knife without protest, then settled onto a fallen log near the creek, while Rebecca positioned herself on the dugout's porch, the rifle across her knees and Anna nursing peacefully. They sat in silence for nearly an hour before Levi spoke again. I owe you an apology for that night, for standing by while Vincent hurt you, for not speaking up when I should have. I've been a coward my whole life, always taking the easy path of following my brother's lead. Your apology doesn't erase what happened, Rebecca replied. But bringing that ledger is a start toward making things right. Vincent will kill me when he finds out, Levi said matter-of-factly. He doesn't tolerate betrayal, especially from family. That's why I need witness protection, relocation money, whatever Marshal Davis can provide. I can't stay in Wyoming territory after this. Where will you go? Levi shrugged. Somewhere Vincent's name carries no weight. California, maybe Oregon. Start over with a new name and try to build something honest for once. He glanced at Anna. Your daughter looks healthy. What's her name? Anna, Rebecca replied, adjusting the baby's position. And she is healthy, despite being born a month early because of what your brother did to me. The reminder made Levi flinch. I'm sorry. I know those words are inadequate, but I mean them. They lapsed back into silence, broken only by the creek's rushing and Anna's small sounds of contentment. Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities and dangers. If Levi was genuine, his evidence could end Vincent's threat. But if this was an elaborate trap, she was putting herself and Anna at enormous risk. The afternoon sun was slanting toward evening when hoofbeats announced Michael's return. He came over the eastern ridge at a gallop, clearly having spotted the unfamiliar horse near the dugout. Rebecca stood quickly, waving to signal she was unharmed. Michael's expression as he took in the scene. Levi sitting unarmed. Rebecca with the rifle, the ledger on the porch beside her, was a mixture of confusion and wariness. He dismounted with his hand on his pistol. Levi, Dalton. Didn't expect to see you here. I came to help, Levi said, rising slowly with his hands visible. To give evidence against Vincent, Mrs. Brennan can explain. Rebecca quickly outlined Levi's arrival and the contents of the ledger. Michael examined the book carefully, his expression growing darker as he read the damning entries. This is exactly what Marshal Davis needs, he said finally. Documented proof of large-scale rustling in Vincent's own handwriting. He looked at Levi. You're really willing to testify against your own brother? I'm willing to stop being complicit in his crimes, Levi replied. If that means testifying, relocating, starting over somewhere new, so be it. I can't keep living as Vincent's accomplice. Michael nodded slowly. Davis is supposed to return within 2 weeks. Until then, you'll stay here where we can watch you. You work for your keep. There's plenty to do preparing for proper cattle operations come summer. I'll do whatever you need, Levi agreed. The next 10 days established an uneasy routine. Levi proved useful. Despite his limited frontier experience, he could keep accurate records, repair equipment with surprising skill, and had genuine knowledge of cattle management that Michael found valuable. He slept in a rough shelter near the creek, ate meals with Michael and Rebecca, and gradually began to seem less like Vincent's brother and more like a man trying to find redemption. Rebecca watched him carefully, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives, but found none. Levi was simply a weak man who'd finally found the courage to do one right thing. Even though it would cost him everything familiar, Marshal Davis arrived on the 11th day, riding into the valley with the purposeful air of someone who'd learned interesting things. His expression when he saw Levi was priceless. Shock, suspicion, then intense interest, as Michael handed him the ledger. "Mr. Dalton," Davis said slowly, "this is unexpected. I'm here to confess to my role in cattle rustling operations and to testify against my brother Vincent," Levi stated formally. "In exchange, I'm requesting witness protection and relocation assistance." Davis spent the next 2 hours examining the ledger and taking Levi's detailed statement. Rebecca listened from inside the dugout, nursing Anna while the men talked on the porch. Levi's testimony was comprehensive. Names of men Vincent had hired for rustling operations, specific dates and locations where cattle had been stolen, buyers who'd purchased the stolen stock knowing they were receiving illegal goods. "This is more than I hoped for," Davis admitted when Levi finished. "Combined with the testimony I've gathered from 3 other ranchers who've had suspicious losses, and statements from 2 of Vincent's former ranch hands who were willing to talk once I offered immunity, I've got enough to bring formal charges. When will you arrest him?" Michael asked. "Soon. I need to coordinate with the territorial prosecutor, maybe bring in additional marshals, given Dalton's influence in the county. A man like that won't come quietly, and his hired guns might decide to fight rather than let their employer face justice." Davis looked at Levi. "You understand that testifying at trial means facing your brother in court, probably enduring attempts to discredit or threaten you." "I understand," Levi replied steadily. "I've spent my whole life afraid of Vincent. It's time to stop being afraid." Davis departed 2 days later, taking Levi with him to a secure location where he'd be protected until the trial. Before leaving, the marshal pulled Rebecca and Michael aside. "You folks have done a remarkable thing here. Stopping a major criminal operation, providing sanctuary to a witness, standing up to a powerful man despite enormous risk. The territory owes you a debt. We just want to be left alone to build our homestead," Michael replied. "To raise Anna in peace. You'll have that," Davis promised. "Once Dalton's convicted, he'll be facing 20 years in territorial prison. His ranch will be liquidated to pay restitution to the ranchers he stole from. His name will carry shame instead of power." He tipped his hat to Rebecca. "You survived him, Mrs. Brennan. That's a victory in itself. But you also helped bring him to justice. That's something rarer." After Davis and Levi rode out, Rebecca and Michael stood together, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of rose and amber. Anna slept in her father's arms. Rebecca had started thinking of Michael that way, not as her husband in name only, but as Anna's true father in every meaningful sense. "It's really over," she said wonderingly. "Vincent's going to prison. We're safe, Michael agreed. "And free to build the life we planned without looking over our shoulders." The trial took place 6 weeks later in Helena, the territorial capital where Vincent's local influence couldn't reach. Rebecca and Michael made the journey with Anna, now 3 months old, and growing more alert and interactive daily. They testified about that night at the Dalton Ranch, about Vincent's cruelty and attempted murder, adding context to the rustling charges. But it was Levi's testimony that proved most damning. He walked the jury through years of criminal activity, explaining how Vincent had systematically stolen from neighbors while maintaining a facade of respectability. His calm recitation of facts, his willingness to accept his own guilt while detailing his brother's greater crimes, was devastating to Vincent's defense. Vincent sat through the trial with rigid fury, his expensive lawyers unable to counter the mountain of evidence against him. Margaret attended every day, her face a mask of horror as her son's true nature was revealed publicly. When the guilty verdict came down, 25 years hard labor in the territorial prison, she left the courtroom without looking at Vincent. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca encountered her former almost mother-in-law on the steps. Margaret stopped, and for a moment the two women studied each other. "You destroyed my family," Margaret said finally, though there was more exhaustion than anger in her voice. "Vincent destroyed your family," Rebecca corrected gently. "I just survived him." "There's a difference." Margaret's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I should have seen what he was. Should have stopped him before it went this far. A mother should know when her son becomes a monster. He was very good at hiding it, Rebecca offered. Even I didn't even see the full extent until it was almost too late. What will you do now? Margaret asked. Return to that valley? Raise your daughter in wilderness? Build a cattle operation, Rebecca replied. Make our homestead prosper. Teach Anna that women can be strong and capable and free to choose their own paths. She paused. And maybe, if you ever want to meet your granddaughter, we wouldn't refuse the visit. Inna deserves to know all her family, even the complicated parts. The offer seemed to surprise Margaret. She's not Vincent's child. She's mine, Rebecca stated firmly. And Michael's. But she's also the child I was carrying when I left your ranch, and that makes her connected to the Dalton family, whether anyone likes it or not. I won't use her as a weapon, but I won't hide her either. Margaret's eyes filled with unexpected tears. You're more generous than I deserve, more than I was to you. Then maybe we both learned something from all this, Rebecca suggested. They parted without further words, but something had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding that people were more complex than the roles they played, capable of both cruelty and change. Michael was waiting with Anna when Rebecca descended the courthouse steps. The baby was gurgling happily, studying her father's face with intense concentration. Ready to go home? He asked. Rebecca looked back at the courthouse one final time. The building where Vincent's power had finally been broken, where justice had been served despite wealth and influence. Then she turned to her husband and daughter, to the life they'd built from desperation and courage. Yes, she said simply. Let's go home. The journey back to their valley took 4 days, but this time Rebecca felt no urgency, no fear of pursuit. They traveled at a comfortable pace, stopping to rest when Anna needed feeding, enjoying the late spring weather that painted the plains in wildflowers and new grass. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking their valley, Rebecca's breath caught. In the 6 weeks they'd been gone, the land had transformed. The creek ran full and clear, grass grew thick enough for grazing, and the framework of what would become their cabin rose against the hillside, work Michael had started before they left for the trial. Thomas sent word he's bringing breeding cattle next month, Michael said, watching her reaction. 20 head to start, and he recommended a young couple from his old cavalry unit who need work. Said they're honest, hard-working, and the wife can help with Anna when you need it. We're really doing this, Rebecca marveled. Building something permanent, something that will last. We are, Michael confirmed. He shifted Anna to one arm and took Rebecca's hand with the other. Together, the way we've done everything else. They descended into the valley as the sun set behind them, painting their shadows long across the land they'd claimed. This place had started as a refuge, became a fortress, and was now transforming into a home, genuine home, built on partnership and respect rather than obligation. That night, with Anna asleep in her cradle and the future spreading before them full of possibility, Rebecca and Michael sat outside the dugout watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. What are you thinking? Michael asked. Rebecca smiled. That we've come a long way from that desperate night when you proposed marriage in Vincent's study. That everything we've survived made us stronger. That Anna's going to grow up knowing her worth isn't determined by any man's opinion. She leaned against Michael's shoulder. And that I'm grateful for every difficult choice that led us here, even the painful ones. Michael's arm circled her waist. Especially the painful ones, Rebecca replied. They taught me I was capable of more than I ever imagined. That I could build a life on my own terms instead of accepting whatever others decided for me. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The night sounds of their valley, familiar now, comforting in their wildness. This land would challenge them. The work ahead would be brutal, and building a successful cattle operation would demand everything they could give, but they would face it. Together, two people who'd found each other in desperate circumstances and discovered that partnership, built on respect, was stronger than romance, built on illusion. They'd survived abandonment, winter, childbirth, and a powerful man's vengeance. Whatever came next, they would survive that too, and thrive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.